Times sure have changed, haven't they? For centuries, the Dalai Lama ruled Tibet, both in country and in exile, without question. It's been forgotten that he was never elected to this position, and in fact, the reason he has held the job so long is by the grace of God. Because one must remember, the Dalai Lama is the God King, the one chosen by the God of the Tibetan people to rule over them. You know, like how the royal family of England ruled for so long because God wanted them to be there. Just like how the Saudi royal family has ruled for so long without question because God chose them to do it. Or maybe like George Bush, after all, God told him to be president. Even though he's always been a champion of the separation between church and state, for some reason the Dalai Lama always held both positions. He always was both the political and spiritual leader of Tibet, both in exile and in country before the Maoist revolution. Of course, this hypocrisy was always ignored because the Dalai Lama is a nice little media darling to attack China with. But now, all of that has changed. The Dalai Lama has stepped down as the political leader of Tibet, held a democratic election in which people could run, and we now have a new Prime Minister of Tibet, Longtsab Sangye. He is now the democratically elected political leader of Tibet. By political leader, I mean government in exile. It's interesting how there can be an election for a government that doesn't exist, but I digress. Now Prime Minister Lobsang Sangye has reached out to the Chinese government to enter into negotiations to make Tibet an autonomous region within China again. Because everybody seems to forget, China and Tibet were never separate. Tibet always was an autonomous region within China. They always had their own laws, their own rule, but essentially the Emperor of China had to approve who was the Dalai Lama, stuff like that, but they got along great. Landlords working with landlords. So Lobsang Sangye reached out to the Chinese government to begin negotiations for the re-autonomization of Tibet. However, it didn't work. As it turns out, the Chinese government isn't interested in talking to him or even care that he exists. He went into the media, particularly the BBC, and went and started complaining that China's not taking him seriously, and that China's not listening to him. Now, he probably thought people were going to listen to him because, well, he is a graduate of Harvard after all. It's amazing how so many leaders, elected or elected, just happen to come from Harvard. And I'm not talking domestically, I'm talking about around the entire world. Like Hector Gonzalez, a graduate of the Kennedy School of Government, a man wanted for crimes against humanity, including massacres. Or Dan Holtz, a man, an Israeli, who graduated from the Harvard School of Business, who went on to the Israeli army and is now wanted on crimes for indiscriminate bombings of Palestinian people. If there's ever one thing we can be sure of, is that quality people are coming out of Harvard. When Mr. Sangye contacted the Chinese government, he found out they don't care about him, and they don't really want to have anything to do with him. But I think Mr. Sangye hasn't realized his government doesn't exist. The position of Prime Minister is something the Tibetan government in exile invented after they were kicked out. The Red Guard kicked them out during the revolution, and now, because he was a pathetic despot, now they've changed their tone, and now he's a prime minister as opposed to being the absolute religious dictator of Tibet. Now that he's been booted out, and to generate public sympathy, Western sympathies, to generate animosity towards China in order to bash it. People seem to forget that the Dalai Lama was booted out of his palace by the Red Guard for a reason. Yes, the Dalai Lama lived in a palace, and he did have over 1,000 slaves working in it. Prime Minister was created to give a sense of legitimacy to a fraudulent government. When they were kicked out, and rightfully so, there was the Dalai Lama, his monks, the landlords, and everybody else. It seems that everybody forgot that under the Dalai Lama and under the Buddhist religious rule of Tibet, everyone in the country was legally the property of the Dalai Lama. It's funny, a fictional government wants to make its fraudulent claim over a non-existent country. Kind of makes you laugh, doesn't it?